Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I used to think my husband, Ryan, and my mother, Linda, just got along really well. Too well, maybe. At family gatherings, they'd laugh at inside jokes, but I brushed it off. My mother had always been charming, and Ryan was just friendly. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, I see the signs I ignored. The way they'd exchange glances, the whispered conversations that ended when I entered the room. But I trusted them both. Why wouldn't I? They were the two people I loved most in the world. Everything changed the night I borrowed Ryan's tablet. Ryan had left his tablet on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, I just needed to check my emails. But when I opened the messaging app, I froze. There, in front of me, was a conversation between Ryan and my mother. The words made my stomach turn. She's starting to suspect something. We need to be careful, let things drift naturally. I can't wait until it's just us, no secrets. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. My hands trembled as I scrolled up. How long had this been going on? I couldn't breathe. My mother, my husband, together, plotting. A part of me wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but the messages were clear. They were waiting for me to slowly let go of my marriage, as if they were guiding me towards some inevitable end. I felt sick. How could my own mother betray me like this? How could Ryan? I had to be smart. If they were trying to manipulate me, I needed to play along. I needed to find out everything. So, I put the tablet back, and I pretended I didn't know. That night, I lay beside Ryan, feeling like a stranger was in my bed. I forced myself to act normal, to smile, to laugh at his jokes. My mother called the next day. "How's my beautiful daughter?" she cooed. The sound of her voice made my skin crawl. I played along, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. I started watching them more closely, noticing every detail. The lingering touches. The way Ryan's eyes lit up when she spoke. They thought I was clueless. But I was about to turn the game around. I decided to test them. I told Ryan I had a work trip and would be gone for the weekend. His response was too eager. "I'll miss you," he said, but there was no sadness in his eyes. I told my mother the same thing. "Oh, honey, enjoy yourself," she chirped. I packed a bag and left. Only I didn't go far. I parked around the corner from my house, heart pounding. If they truly were planning something behind my back, they'd take this chance. And I would be watching. I watched from my car, heart racing, as Ryan came out of the house. He was smiling, too much. He waved at someone. My breath hitched when I saw my mother step out from the shadows of the garage. They embraced, their faces too close, their bodies too comfortable. I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This was no coincidence. They had been waiting for me to leave so they could be together. I wanted to confront them, to scream and break everything. But I didn't. I stayed hidden, knowing I needed more proof. I stayed in my car for hours, watching them. It was painful, but I had to see how deep their betrayal ran. They went to a restaurant, laughing and holding hands, oblivious to the fact that I was just a few feet away. Ryan was supposed to be mine, my husband, my love, and my mother was supposed to protect me, not destroy me. I stayed quiet, watching as they made plans, their voices filled with excitement. Ryan kissed her cheek. I wanted to die, but then something shifted in me. The anger was bubbling up, and it felt powerful. I couldn't keep pretending. That night, I walked into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels like nothing had happened. "Hi, honey," he said, smiling. The smile didn't reach his eyes. I closed the door behind me, slowly. "We need to talk." He froze. For a second, his eyes flashed with fear, but he quickly masked it. "What's wrong?" "I know everything," I said, my voice steady, but my hands were shaking. Ryan's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Ryan tried to deny everything. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice pleading. "There's nothing going on." But I could see it in his eyes. The guilt. The panic. "You're lying," I screamed. "I saw the messages. I know what's been happening between you and my mother." Ryan's face fell. "Please, just listen." "No." I cut him off. "I don't need to hear your lies anymore." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I couldn't let them see me weak, not now. I turned and walked out of the room, knowing I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind raced, replaying every moment with Ryan, every conversation with my mother. How had I been so blind? They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. The thought of it made my stomach churn. But I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them tear me apart without a fight. The next morning, I called my mother. My heart was pounding as I dialed her number. "Mom," I said when she picked up, my voice colder than I intended. "We need to talk. You and Ryan have been planning a future together, haven't you?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then she spoke. "How do you know?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect me, didn't even try to deny it. "Yes," she said quietly. "Ryan and I have been seeing each other. I didn't want to hurt you, but we were going to tell you soon." The world spun around me. I felt as if my entire life was crashing down in that one moment. "I thought you were my best friend," I whispered. "How could you do this to me?" Her voice softened. "I never meant for it to go this far, but I love him, and he loves me." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I needed space, air, anything to escape this nightmare. The worst part wasn't that Ryan and my mother were in love. No, it was the way they had planned everything. How they'd watched me, manipulated me, like I was a pawn in their game. I couldn't stop thinking about the future they had dreamed up without me in it. How easily they had taken what was mine. I sat on the couch, my mind racing. Where had I gone wrong? Was it my fault? Had I missed all the signs? I thought back to every moment, every conversation I'd had with them. Had it all been fake? Were they both just pretending? Ryan came home late that night. I didn't even acknowledge him when he entered. He sat down next to me, his face filled with guilt and desperation. "Can we talk?" I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his apologies. "No," I said firmly. "There's nothing to talk about." "Please, just listen," he began, but I cut him off. "You've already made your choice," I said, my voice sharp. "And I'm not going to beg for your love or your loyalty." He reached out to touch me, but I pulled away. "Don't. You've lost everything." The next day, I called my mother again. This time, I couldn't hide the anger in my voice. "I want you to come over," I said, my words cold and deliberate. She agreed, and when she arrived, I didn't waste any time. "You need to explain yourself," I said. "How long has this been going on? What were you planning?" Her eyes flickered with guilt, but she didn't back down. "It started slowly," she admitted. "I never meant for you to find out this way. But Ryan and I are in love. We were planning a future together, and I thought you'd eventually understand." "How could I ever understand this?" I asked, my voice breaking. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't live in a house that was filled with betrayal. I couldn't stay with Ryan, not after everything he had done. I packed my things. I was leaving. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I needed to heal, to find myself again. I walked into the living room, where Ryan was sitting, staring blankly at the TV. I stood in front of him, my bag in hand. "I'm leaving," I said. "You and my mother can have each other. But I'm done." I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked out, the door closing behind me. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going. The night was quiet, the road stretching out before me like a blank canvas. I had no plan, no destination, but I knew I couldn't go back. Every mile I put between myself and the house felt like I was slowly shedding the weight of my past. But the pain of it all, the betrayal, the heartbreak, was still there, gnawing at me. I finally stopped at a small motel, checking into a room I'd never stay in under normal circumstances. But tonight, nothing felt normal. I stared at the ceiling, the silence deafening, and asked myself how I could ever rebuild from this. The next morning, I woke up to an envelope slid under my motel door. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Ryan's handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands, the words burning into my soul. "I know I've hurt you more than you can understand. I'm sorry for everything. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I hope you find peace, even if it's without me." The letter was full of apologies, regret, and promises that meant nothing now. I wanted to throw it away, but part of me couldn't. It was proof that I had been loved once, even if that love had turned into something cruel. I didn't expect it, but it came anyway. My mother called me that afternoon. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her everything I had been holding in, but I bit my tongue. "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat. "I'm just trying to figure out what to do next." She sighed. "I never wanted to hurt you, sweetheart. I thought you'd understand one day." I couldn't do it. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. "Goodbye, Mom," I said before hanging up. 2 days later, I received an unexpected visitor. Ryan showed up at the motel. His eyes were red, his face drawn. He looked like a man who had lost everything. "I need to talk to you," he said, standing in the doorway, his voice hoarse. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear anything he had to say, but I couldn't deny that part of me still cared. "Why are you here?" I asked, crossing my arms. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I know what I've done to you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know that I love you. I always have." I shook my head. "It doesn't matter anymore, Ryan. You made your choice. And so did I." After Ryan left, I spent the next few weeks alone, trying to heal. I moved into a small apartment, away from the chaos. Every day was a struggle, but I forced myself to go through the motions. I started seeing a therapist, talking about everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. Slowly, I began to piece myself back together. But the memories lingered. The laughter, the secret glances, the words they had said. It wasn't something I could erase, but it was something I had to accept. I was learning how to live without them. One evening, as I was unpacking more boxes in my new apartment, I found a photograph of Ryan and me from our wedding day. The picture felt like a lifetime ago, a memory that was now tainted with betrayal. I stared at it, torn between the love I had once felt for him and the anger that still burned inside me. How had it all gone so wrong? Was there something I had missed? I couldn't answer that question. And maybe, for my own peace, I didn't need to. Some things weren't meant to be understood. But it was hard not to wonder. Could I ever trust anyone again? My mother showed up at my apartment a week later. I didn't expect her, and I certainly wasn't prepared for the confrontation that followed. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she said, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. I didn't know what I was doing. "I've ruined everything, and I can't take it back." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had shattered my life. But another part of me, the part that still longed for the mother I had once known, couldn't help but soften. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice breaking. "You betrayed me in the worst way possible." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, one day, we can find a way back to each other." As time passed, I slowly rebuilt my life. I surrounded myself with friends who supported me, people who loved me without strings attached. I focused on my work, my passions, and most importantly, myself. The first few months were the hardest. I cried more than I ever had, sometimes over small things, an old song, a place we had visited together. But I never let it stop me from moving forward. I began to realize something important. I didn't need them in my life to be whole. The love I had for Ryan and my mother was still there, but it wasn't the same anymore. It had to change. It had been nearly 6 months since I last spoke to either of them when I received a call from Ryan. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tentative. I didn't know what to say. It had been so long, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him again. But something told me that if I didn't, I'd always wonder what he had to say. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "We can talk." When we met, he looked different. He was thinner, more worn, like someone who had been living in the shadow of his mistakes. "I've lost everything, Emma," he said, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm not asking for you back. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I've been to therapy, trying to figure out how to be a better person." I listened quietly, my heart heavy. But I couldn't go back. Ryan and I talked for hours that day, but in the end, nothing had changed. I didn't want him back. I didn't want that life anymore. I had made peace with it. I had learned that my worth wasn't defined by their love or betrayal. It was something I could create on my own. As the months went on, I distanced myself from both Ryan and my mother. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I found new strength in myself. I knew that my future was mine to shape. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. A year passed, and life began to feel normal again. I no longer woke up with the heaviness of betrayal in my chest. I spent my time focusing on my career, my hobbies, and most importantly, on healing. I took up painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. Each stroke of the brush became a small step toward reclaiming my life, my independence. I realized that I had the power to rebuild myself, and I did so piece by piece. I began to smile again, to laugh, to love life. It wasn't easy, but I was no longer the woman I had been when all of this started. I was stronger. I never expected to see Ryan or my mother again, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. One afternoon, I ran into Ryan at a coffee shop. He was with someone, another woman. She was laughing, holding his hand, and for a moment, I felt a pang in my heart. Not because I wanted him back, but because I realized I wasn't the one he had chosen. He saw me and hesitated, his face turning pale. He stood up and walked toward me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." I smiled, but it wasn't with bitterness. "It's okay. You didn't do this to me. I did it to myself when I let you into my life." And with that, I walked away, leaving the past behind for good. My mother called me one afternoon, asking if we could meet. I was hesitant, but I agreed. When I saw her, I could tell she had changed. Her eyes were softer, filled with regret. She had been through therapy too, trying to make sense of what had happened. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't change the past, but I need you to know that I am truly sorry for everything." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the woman who had once cared for me. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But maybe, one day, I'll understand." It wasn't a perfect closure, but it was a step forward. As time passed, I built a life I could be proud of. I traveled, met new people, and allowed myself to feel happiness again. I became a version of myself I never thought I could be after everything I had gone through. I learned to trust again, but this time, I did it on my terms. I loved without expectations, but with boundaries. I was no longer afraid of being hurt because I knew I was strong enough to handle it. I no longer spent my nights thinking about what went wrong. Instead, I spent them thinking about where I was going, what I was becoming. The future was bright. I received a letter from my mother one day, telling me she had moved away. She was starting fresh, living on her own in a small town. "I hope you find peace, my darling," the letter said. "I know you will. You always were stronger than I realized." I smiled as I read it. Maybe there was hope for us after all, but not now. Not when I still needed to find peace for myself. I folded the letter and placed it in a box, one I would keep in a safe place. Not to hold on to the past, but to remind me of how far I had come. And so, I said goodbye to them both, Ryan and my mother. I let go of the pain, the heartbreak, and everything that held me back. The future was mine. Thank you for listening to my story until now. If you like the video, please support it by subscribing and liking.